Hello, you're watching Explained by NewsX. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. Today we're going to be discussing about Saudi Arabia's decision to abolish the Kafala system. Picture this, a young nurse from Karnataka, full of hope, boarding a flight to Saudi Arabia in 2017. Her name was Hasina Begum. She had been promised a salary of 1.5 lakh rupees a month, a chance to lift her family out of poverty, to finally give her children a better life. But this is not how it turned out. On your screens is the visual of her returning home after being rescued due to the intervention of the Indian embassy in Riyadh for Hasina to be rescued and brought home. What really happened? Well, once she landed in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, Hasina's dream turned into a nightmare. Her passport was taken, her movements controlled under the Kafala system. She wasn't an employee anymore, she was property forced into servitude. Hasina endured relentless physical and emotional abuse, and then one horrifying night, her kafil, employer, the very man who was supposed to be her sponsor, threw her from the third floor of a building. Even as she lay injured, she was beaten again, this time inside a police station. This is what the Kafala system allows, modern-day slavery. A blatant violation of human rights. The Kafala system is a type of sponsorship system in the Middle East that involves binding migrant workers to a specific employer throughout the period of their residence in a country. The Kafala system was the golden key to entry, but an iron lock on freedom. Without the kafil's permission, a worker could not change jobs, could not leave the country, not even to visit a sick child, and often could not even retrieve their own passport, which was often confiscated upon arrival. As an institution, it became widely known for allowing the mistreatment, oppression, and situations similar to today's slavery of workers. Various human rights organizations and critics have been condemning that system for being too restrictive and prone to misuse. For half a century, the Kafala system was the backbone of economic miracle in the Gulf Cooperation Council states, Saudi Arabia being its largest, most complex crucible. The system's roots go back to the 1950s. Following the great oil boom, the Gulf nations suddenly needed a massive temporary workforce to power their modernization overdrive, to build roads, hospitals, schools, and eventually towering cities. They wanted cheap, plentiful labor, but they did not want permanent residence or the complexity of a state-run labor bureaucracy. The solution? Delegate the state's responsibility for managing the migrant workforce to individual citizens and private companies. It was designed for efficiency, but it metasized into absolute control. The kafil held all the power, the worker, none. The Kafala system primarily applies to blue-collar and low-wage migrant workers, especially those in domestic work, construction, hospitality, cleaning, and other manual labor sectors. These workers are typically from countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Philippines, Nepal, and Ethiopia. White-collar professionals such as doctors, engineers, and corporate employees as well are not usually subject to the harshest aspects of the Kafala system, though technically they also require sponsorship for residency and employment. In a landmark move last week, Saudi Arabia scrapped this Kafala sponsorship system. The reform is expected to impact nearly 13 million migrant workers, including more than 2.5 million Indians, who form a massive chunk of the Saudi workforce. The decision to do so was announced in June 2025. It constituted a major change in the kingdom's labor market and is in line with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 goals of improving human rights and modernizing the economy. Saudi Arabia was forced to abolish the Kafala because the system had become indefensible in the face of mounting international scrutiny and domestic reform pressures. By handing all power to the employer, it opened the door to horrific abuse like passport seizures, unpaid wages, brutal working hours, physical and sexual violence, and forced labor. Approximately 1.5 million women, domestic workers primarily from Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines, who work in Saudi Arabia. The vulnerability of domestic workers under the Kafala system is rooted in the nature of their work, typically undertaken behind closed doors, in private homes, far from their own communities, and the lack of legal protection they receive. Many people who migrate to the Middle East pay up to $3,000 to recruitment agencies only to find themselves working long hours for a pittance and with no time off in jobs that often differ vastly from the ones they signed up for back home. This treatment includes the sexual sort is relatively common. The International Labour Organization, a UN body, reckons that 600,000 workers in the region can be classed as victims of trafficking. On average, 4 migrated Bangladeshi workers died in Saudi Arabia every day in 2022. The situation is so concerning that when Saudi Arabia secured the position to host the 2034 World Cup, it was reported that many migrant workers will die to make it happen. Testimonies from many migrated workers who have worked in buildings, stadiums, transport networks and hotels suggestion of views being deeply entrenched in the Gulf Kingdom. This was proved in the case of Qatar. The world's richest nation was paying minuscule amounts to migrated laborers who were constructing World Cup stadiums in 2019. It was reported that workers built the infrastructure for the World Cup in Qatar. They were abused, denied their wages and trapped in a system that they cannot escape from, and worked on sites where temperatures can reach 50 degrees in the summer. Let's listen into the account of some of these workers.
Nilipofika kwa jiko, Maria akapiga nduru, wakaamka. Mama, nini Maria? Nachomeka. Nisaidie mama. Alipotamka, nilihisi kuna mtu ananipiga mateke.
I woke up from 6:30 in the morning and I work until 11, non-stop.
So they did not pay me the first month, the second month. Then in the third month, I asked them, why you don't want to pay me?
I called the agent. I told him about the situation and he told me, you came here to work, not to play. I tried to explain to him, yes, I came to work, but the condition, the life I'm going through is not a normal life.
Apart from Saudi Arabia, there are other countries which have abolished or diluted Kafala. The Israeli Supreme Court struck down the Israeli version of the Kafala system in a landmark March 2006 decision. Before that, migrant laborers in Israel were tied to a specific employer for their duration of their visas. Over the years, when Israel maintained this system, passport confiscation and other abuses were systematic and effectively went unpunished. In 2009, Bahrain was the first country in the Gulf Cooperation Council to repeal the Kafala system. In a public statement, the Labour Minister likened the system to slavery. Under the new law, migrants are sponsored by the Labour Market Regulation Authority and can change from one employer to another without their employer's agreement. UAE diluted the Kafala system, and in June 2017, UAE adopted a new bill to bring its labour law into consistency with the International Labour Organization's Domestic Workers Convention, providing migrant domestic workers with the same labour protections as other UAE employees. But this is not enough. The Kafala system is still alive across the Gulf, including in Kuwait, Oman, and in places like Lebanon and Qatar in slightly tweaked forms. In these countries, if one looks at the ILO's Forced Labour Convention of 1930, the definition of forced or compulsory labour isn't very different from what the Kafala system has turned into. The ILO states it as all work or service which is exacted from any person under the threat of a penalty and for which the person has not offered himself or herself voluntarily. So the battle for human rights and dignity of labour is still a long road. The shackles of Kafala may have been broken by a royal decree in Saudi Arabia, but the work of unchaining the mind of both the employer and the employee has just begun there. A life of dignity, once a distant dream for millions working in the desert sun, is now a legal right. Is it a new dawn for Saudi Arabia and a newfound freedom for the hands that rebuilt its future? Well, that's something time will tell. Let's take a break.
Saudi ends 50-year Kafala system. Once controlled by laws and policies, 13 million migrant workers freed. Big step to improve labor rights. What does this decision truly mean?